We at MD Coaches know that match is a stressful time. If your match results were not what you expected, you might need the time and the space to explore what's next. MD Coaches is proud to offer a comprehensive 6-week virtual group coaching program that explores your unique value and possibilities beyond the match. We're offering 4 separate rolling cohorts, Sundays, April 7 through May 12, or May 19 through June 23rd. A second option is Thursdays, May 2nd through June 6th, or June 13th through July 25th. All sessions begin at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register today at mdcoaches.store/medical-student-coaching.
When I got into graduate school, it was like, oh my God, this is actually a system where if you work hard, it'll pay off. Whereas in music, you can work hard and nothing will happen because so few people get to that level.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com because you're not in this alone. And don't forget that CME credit is available when you listen with us. Just look for CMify in the show notes to learn how. My guest today is an internationally acclaimed educator and public speaker. He holds the distinction of being the first psychologist in North Carolina to be named a full professor of family medicine at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine. He also coined the Google search term cinemeducation, which I'm looking forward to hearing about today. And in addition to all that, he is a very talented musician. So let's hear my conversation with Dr. Matthew Alexander. I am really looking forward to my conversation today with Dr. Matthew Alexander, who is a bit of a special interest guest. We're usually interviewing physicians. Dr. Alexander is not a physician, but he is a very important doctor, a mental health professional, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation about those subjects and more. But let me begin by saying, Matt, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you on Prescriptions for Success.
Randy, thank you. I've been looking forward to this as well for a long time.
Well, let's make the best of it, and we'll go ahead and get started with the discussion of your beginnings, as we always do. And as I understand it, if I have this right or not, you actually grew up on the west side of Manhattan. Do I have that right?
That's very accurate. 78th Street and Broadway. My bedroom growing up actually was facing Broadway, the Great White Way.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. I shared it with my brother. And 78th Street is a very special street because you can take it all the way down to Riverside Park or all the way up to Central Park.
Do I remember correctly that your father was a musician?
My father was a musician. In his 20s, he was a concert pianist.
Yeah.
And when he realized that was a pretty hard gig to make money at, he got accepted to Harvard and studied composition.
Wow.
And then he became a composer of classical music and a college professor of music. And he was quite a force to be reckoned with. He wrote 4 symphonies that were played all over the world. He knew a lot of the great people of the time in classical music. Yeah, I bet he did. Yeah.
Yeah, to be a musician in New York at any time in history had to have been a really treasurable thing to go through. And do you think your experience in New York had any? Well, let me ask the question directly. Can you point to anything in your experience in New York that sort of informed how you lived your adult life?
That's a wonderful question. I would start by saying I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm a psychologist.
Right.
But
Did I say psychiatrist?
No, but
Okay.
I want to clarify that.
Okay.
You're fine. But psychiatrists will do a in-depth interview with people, and they start by asking people what their first memory is.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about my story, I believe, is my first memory is Bach's C major prelude, which is one of the most peaceful, beautiful pieces.
It is. The only thing I can play on the piano, I might add.
Yeah, I can play it too, up to a point, and then I improvise. Yeah. But when I was 6 months old, I was in the crib, and my dad was practicing. And when I hear that piece of music, I'm transported back to this pre-cognitive space. That was certainly an influence because I love music and I love melody in music.
That's really interesting.
My mother was a poet, and she wrote 4 books of poetry.
Holy cow, you had artists all over the place.
I did. And they were quite a team, and they both were very disciplined and focused on their art. And so I think discipline and focus were something that I observed. I need to mention another part of my childhood, which is that I had an older brother who was mentally ill, and I think that may have sparked my interest in psychology and human behavior. He was diagnosed schizophrenic / bipolar / borderline. So he was quite an interesting guy. He was 9 years older than I was, and I could talk for hours about his impact on me. But I think the positive part of it was that I became interested in mental health and helping families and helping couples and helping people have better relationships.
Mm-hmm. But your trajectory to that professional life in mental health was not exactly a straight line.
No.
You took a little detour into entertainment, as I recall. You want to tell us about that?
I was very fortunate to go to Harvard. While I was there with the late 60s, and everybody was influenced by the Beatles and Bob Dylan. And I guess I combined my parents' 2 talents with music and words. I became a songwriter. And while I was in high school, I was, quote unquote, discovered by a Tin Pan Alley, very successful songwriter named Lou Stallman. And that really planted the seed. I started writing a lot of songs. And while at Harvard, I was performing in a coffee house called the Nameless Coffee House. And I just loved it. So I almost dropped out of Harvard because I felt that if I graduated, it would decrease my credibility with young listeners. Who would listen to a Harvard graduate? But a Harvard dropout, now that's cool. Yeah. That's a kind of mixed up thinking where I reflect a lot on that. And my father came down pretty hard when I told him I wanted to drop out. He said, "You will not drop out. You will finish." I said, "Okay, if I finish, will you leave me alone and let me do what I want to do?" And he agreed reluctantly. And so I did manage to graduate with honors. And then I pursued music for 7 years. It was really my passion. And I was a singer-songwriter. I was in a band, and I was in New York for a while and LA for a while. And one of the funny stories is the band I was playing with was opening for a group called Mirage. We were opening for them for 5 nights. And we went for the first night for the sound check, and we said, "Where's Mirage?" And they said, "Well, they're not playing anymore. You're opening now for someone else." And we said,
"Wow.
Well, yeah, Mirage disappeared. Go figure."
Yeah.
So we asked, "Well, who are we opening for?" And the guy said, "You don't know who you're opening for? You're opening for the next Bob Dylan." And
Holy cow.
My playing partner and I looked at each other. We said, "Yeah, right. What's his name?" Well, his name is Bruce Springsteen. And so we we walked away and said, yeah, with a name like Bruce, he's really going to make it.
Oh, did you really?
We said that. And we opened for him for 5 nights, 2 shows a night. And it was the most incredible thing I've ever heard. He was phenomenal. So we weren't surprised when he made it. But, I was in New York for 2 years with Moonshine, was the name of the group. And then I moved to Los Angeles and pursued a career as a songwriter with enough success to keep me in it, but not enough success to stay in it. It's a very difficult world. I once played my songs for a guy at Warner Brothers, and he said after 3 songs, he said, you write really good songs, but we're looking for great songs.
Mm.
So that was kind of a wake-up call that maybe I ought to fall back on something more secure.
Are you a doctor struggling to provide the best care for your patients while dealing with financial and caregiving matters out of the scope of your practice? Do you find yourself scrambling to keep up with the latest resources and wish there was an easier way? Then this virtual caregiver conference resource will save you time, money, and sanity by giving you all the resources and information your patients need in one place. This conference helps you and your patients enlist the best strategies around healthcare resources and the best financial steps for your patients while navigating caregiving situations. You don't have to go home feeling frustrated and helpless because you couldn't connect your patients with the best services. Find out more at jeanniedoherty.com or click in the link in the show's notes. You don't want to miss this caregiver resource.
We'll get back to our interview shortly, but first I want to take just a moment to speak to anyone who might be struggling with student loan debt. Did you know that around 75% of physician residents have student loans ranging from $250,000 to $500,000 or even more? And sometimes interest rates can be triple that of a home mortgage. Regardless of the balance on your student loan, you can benefit from a counselor with no vested interest in your decisions. Joy Sorensen Navarre, founder and president of Navigate, is a neutral third party working for a flat fee to create huge savings for physicians. She's a frequent speaker at residency programs, hospitals, and conferences, and she's been published in journals and websites throughout the medical community. So regardless of the balance on your student loan, do yourself a favor and contact Joy Sorensen Navarre at navigatestudentloans.com. Well, the next question, which had literally sort of come to the tip of my tongue, was how did you know that it was time to make a switch? But my experience with artistically driven people is the mere threat of rejection is many times not enough to cause you to rethink your priorities. So do you have any thoughts on how you might have had a better level of wisdom at that time than most aspiring musicians?
Randy, that is such a great question because I think you have to know when to say when. And so the story is after my 3rd year in LA, and I had success. I did have songs published, and I had people at recording companies interested in me, but never got that far enough with it. And then one day I took the same song to 2 different publishers who were in the same building. And the first publisher said, "I love your chorus, but you need to change your verse." The second publisher said, "I love your verse, but you need to change your chorus." And I figured if I listened to both of them, I'd have to come in with a totally different song.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt very discouraged. I walked across the street, and there actually was a bookstore. I picked up a book on the music business, and in the opening chapter, it said, "If you're reading this book, please know that your chances of making it in the music business are less than the chances of being hit by lightning." At that point, I decided it was time to probably think about another career, which I did. I applied to graduate school, got into the University of Michigan. But, Randy, I made a decision that I would never give up my music. So I formed my own record company here in Charlotte, and I still put out records every 2 or 3 years, and I have some success with it. Not monetary success, but creative success. So that's a story, and I'm sticking by it.
Well, and it's a good story, and certainly I think could serve as a very instructive chapter for any very talented people. It is a fact, at least as I see it, and I'm going to be interested if you agree, but the people who are in charge of making artists successful don't really know a hell of a lot about art. And
Correct.
whether or not you strike them as somebody that should be promoted is very much a serendipitous thing. And it sounds like that's exactly what you were going through.
Right. It's very much a monetary thing, and they want you to create something that is just like a recent hit, by and large, particularly in the 70s and 80s, which is a long time ago. But it shifted where they weren't really interested in developing artists. They really wanted you to have the finished product. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I wouldn't say that they are particularly musically oriented, and it's more about, can you make money at it? And that's tough to predict. And I understand their position as well. It is a business. And so they're looking for young, attractive people. That's been a change too, is now if you're not good looking, forget it. And if you're not young, forget it.
That's right.
And I don't care about the music, but you got to look good.
Well, that's a really fascinating story, and I could literally talk about that for hours. And in fact, you have already in Dale Waxman's fabulous podcast, Life Changing Moments, and I want to encourage our audience to go and hear that one as well, because the details of that story are really really interesting.
Thank you.
But let's talk a little bit about your clinical career. This decision to pursue a degree in psychology, I don't know if that's something that I would have expected a musician to pick or not, but do you have any thoughts on what led you in that direction?
Well, actually a lot of musicians also do social service. I don't know if it's the same part of the brain. There's a creativity in teaching and in working with people that I can talk about. Mm-hmm. But when I was at Harvard, I took a class on relationships. It was based on the work of a psychiatrist named Harry Stack Sullivan, who was the founder of interpersonal psychology. And the class was interesting for several reasons. One was that the TA was a man named Daniel Goleman, who went on to, of course, write Emotional Intelligence and become a very powerful influence in the whole world of psychology. But the class involved 2 papers. The first one was a 20-page single-spaced paper describing a relationship. And then at the end of the course, you had to write a 20-page single-spaced paper analyzing that relationship based on the theories that were in there. And that became a passion of mine. I remember when I was a teenager and a young adult, I would talk endlessly with friends about their relationships. I was really fascinated by relationships and the idea of working with people. So an interesting segue, while I was trying to figure out what to do with my life in Los Angeles, I was in Jungian analysis. So Jungian analysis is basically largely based on dream analysis. I had this moment of recognition when I was talking with my analyst. And I think recognition is part of my recipe for success, is to be open to that feeling that you meet somebody or you're inspired somebody and you say to yourself, I want to be that person. And so I was sitting across from my analyst talking about my dreams. And I said to myself, I want to be in his chair. I really like this. And they say that the only people in the world that need 40 hours of therapy a week are therapists, because we like doing it so much.
It's a really interesting take, and it made me think about my own experience at an early age when, in spite of the fact when I had to go and see the doctor, the physician, I was terrified because I grew up in the rural South. I was surrounded by a lot of people who were not well educated, and one of the many things that some of my relatives would threaten me with was, if you don't come in out of the cold, you're going to get sick, and we're going to take you to the doctor, and you're going to get shots.
Wow.
They threaten you with that kind of stuff. But I remember in my childhood visits to the doctor, for whatever reason, I was actually fascinated with what was going on there, all the
Very
gadgets
interesting.
around and the smells
Yeah.
and all
Yes.
those kind of things. So my mind was made up relatively early, and it sounds like you kind of experienced the same sort of fascination.
Yeah, you had a moment of recognition that you were surrounded by something that spoke to you. And
Exactly.
it allowed you to kind of follow through on that.
Well, let's follow this a little further. So you decided to get an education in psychology,
Correct.
and specifically clinical psychology.
Well, no, it was a small correction. I wanted to be a clinical psychologist, but clinical psychology programs are extremely difficult to get into. So I got into a program which speaks to my career, which was a combined program in psychology and education. It was a dual degree program, and it was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And what's interesting about Ann Arbor, Michigan is the clinical psychology program there is the best clinical psychology program in the country, as would be taught in the 1950s. What I mean by that, it's extremely psychoanalytic.
Mm-hmm.
It's extremely backwards in my belief. So even though it's a great program, it would have been a terrible fit for me. I was very interested in education because I had taught seventh grade for a year in Los Angeles while I was retreating from the music business. And I think a lot of therapy is educating people about what's
Mm-hmm.
healthy behavior and not healthy behavior. But of course, I was fascinated by the psychology part as well. And because I had been in the music business for so long, when I got into graduate school, it was like, oh my God, this is actually a system where if you work hard, it'll pay off.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in music, you can work hard and nothing will happen because so few people get to that level. So I was a kind of a non-traditional candidate, and they accepted me. And there were 8 of us, I think, in the program. And I finished first. I finished in 4 years, and I had straight A's because I was so motivated after this 7 years in the wilderness of the music business.
It's good to be in the right place at the right time.
Correct.
So, I obviously you had a number of choices open to you at that point. And if I'm reading the CV correctly, you actually made the decision to, of course, have a clinical career, but you wanted to stay in the academic world as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I had no idea when I started in graduate school where that would lead me. And it was fascinating because I thought I wanted to teach at a university, but I had to do a postdoctoral fellowship, and I was accepted in this program in Detroit for 2 years with a wonderful mentor named Aaron Rutledge. And Aaron Rutledge was one of the founders of the field of marriage therapy in the 50s and 60s. He was a kind of pioneer. But he was also tuned in to a new profession in medicine, a subspecialty called family medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And so as part of the postdoctoral fellowship, we spent half of our time doing clinical work in Grosse Pointe and half of the time teaching family doctors and medical students in Detroit. And I found that I really liked being in the hospital. I liked teaching. I wasn't that good at it when I began. I really didn't understand how to teach physicians, but I learned quickly. It was quite compelling. And so that really changed my trajectory because it was a chance to teach, but it wasn't in a traditional university setting.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics. Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. Tell me a little bit about your first impressions of medical students at that point in your life.
Well, it's a great question because I remember vividly giving my first talk to a group of medical students. It was in one of these bowl settings. And I was down at the bottom, and unfortunately, they scheduled me during exam week. So there were about 12 medical students, and they were all at the back, at the top of the bowl. I was at the bottom of the bowl, and I had, prepared remarks, and it didn't go over that well, Randy, because what I remember, unfortunately, and this may be through the fog of time exaggerated, I remember that they started throwing paper airplanes in the air. And I said, I'm bombing here.
Sounds like a bunch of arrogant medical students that have no idea what's in store for them, but go ahead with the story.
Yeah. And then, I was thrown into grading some of their papers, and I'm really embarrassed to admit this, but they would use acronyms. And I would write on their paper, don't abbreviate, write the whole name.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, God, I didn't know anything. But, you have to start somewhere. And the medical students were, I don't remember, at that point, I was only doing medical students. I wasn't doing residents. But I got better at it. And, there's a whole story about that, too, about my interest in cinema. But I like being in the hospital. I like that setting. And, it's amazing, my 36 years teaching, how much I learned. I mean, most of my education was self-taught when I came out of graduate school by teaching all these sort of things. The genogram is a wonderful thing, but the thing that I had to learn was you have to be case-oriented and you've got to be engaging. And it's a lot harder now. I know I'm jumping ahead, but with the computer, back then there weren't computers that people used. So people really paid attention. Now people are on their phones or on their computers. But no, I liked it. It's just I'll never forget the paper airplanes.
I can see how that would be something that would stick in your mind.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, and I want to make sure I have this straight, these students that were being so hilariously funny, they thought,
Yes.
were they first year, second year, or were they in their clinical years, or what stage of the process?
I think they're probably in their first or second years.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. And what I'm seeing there is people who are very young, people who haven't seen the real world in the way that a professional musician or anybody else
Yes.
would have. And they just kind of really don't have the appropriate level of respect for what they're doing. I noticed when I was a medical student, and I'll be interested to get your reaction on this, there were a sprinkling of students in my freshman class who had spent some time in the military. Some of them had even been to Vietnam, but they were older than the rest of us, and they had a completely different pattern of behavior that was more mature and more down to earth. So is it possible that the youthfulness of these students led them to sort of disregard what you had to say? And do you think it would have made better sense to have deferred that interaction with the psychologist to later in their medical school years?
Well, possibly. But I think part of the problem was that I was also green. I didn't know that much.
Sure.
I hadn't had a clinical practice of any sort. So if I was in that situation today, I would say, everybody up there, you need to come down. Let's come down.
Right.
Don't stay up there. I know the air is better up there, but don't be afraid. Come on down.
Yeah.
And then I would start out by saying, what do you know about the genogram? What are you interested in knowing?
Mm-hmm.
And I would tailor it to them. I really was thrown in. What's the Daniel and the Lions? Or I was thrown into the Lions, and I don't blame it all on them. I think I was pretty green as well.
That's very interesting, in that they were unknowingly victims of their own youthfulness,
right?
And you were sort of in the same position. Right. As I was saying before, you clearly have chosen to stay closely connected to medical education, and clearly it has been a rewarding decision for you. Would you like to just talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. I would say that the nicest people I've ever known in my life are the family doctors and the family practice residents. They're just kind. They're lovely people. I have nothing but wonderful things to say about family medicine and the family practice program. And what I learned the first 10 years, and I will say that one of the things that I took from Wayne State was the use of video review, which was very, very interesting. We used a lot of that at the Department of Family Medicine here in Charlotte. But, what happened, this is another recognition part of my life where I recognized in someone else something I wanted to be. I remember being 10 years or so teaching behavioral medicine, and what a psychologist knows about depression and anxiety, for example, is very different than what a physician needs to know. So they're less interested in the theory, more in the practical parts of it. So at the 10-year spot, I really was getting tired of teaching the same thing over and over again. And I went out west to a conference, and I met a guy who was using theater to spice up his talks. And I thought, well, that would be cool to do something like that. And around the same time, I was exposed to people that were using film clips to spice up their talks. I said, that would be interesting, because I've always loved movies. And so I started writing about this, and I was actually encouraged by the Department of Family Medicine in Chapel Hill that this could be a research area. I started writing about it, and I thought it was pretty cool because since I was writing about it, I allowed myself the luxury of Friday afternoons. I would find a quiet place in the hospital, and I'd watch a movie, and I would pick out clips from that movie that I could use for teaching, and I called it cinemeducation.
What a great idea.
Yeah, and it totally changed my approach to teaching where you would show a clip. It could be 2 minutes. Everyone loves movies. And then we would spend an hour talking about the clip, about how it illustrated aspects of panic attacks, what their experience, the residents, what their experience was with panic attacks, how to treat them. And it became a lot of fun. And I think fun is really important.
I was going to say, I bet the students were just couldn't wait to get to that part of their day.
They did. They liked it a lot. And the other thing that happened around that time that made teaching a lot more fun is you mentioned Dale Waxman. Dale joined our department, and we became a team, physician psychologist team. And I think one of the very important ways to establish credibility with physicians is to co-teach with a faculty physician. And Dale and I, our personalities were so similar, and we started using cinema together to teach. We found something very interesting about this approach, that some months when we had certain residents on behavioral medicine, we would show clips and they would talk endlessly about the clip. And Dale and I would meet afterwards and say, "Oh my God, we're so good at this. This is so good."
A little mutual admiration society.
Mutual admiration society.
Good for you.
Yeah. And then the next month, we would do the same film clips and nobody would talk. And we would say, "We're terrible at this." And it took a couple of years to realize that this approach works a lot better with extroverts, because extroverts are not afraid to talk. Introverts are afraid to talk. And I've had that experience throughout my career using cinemeducation, that if it's an introverted crowd, it's not going to be as much fun as extroverts who say whatever comes to their mind.
Man, I have really enjoyed this conversation, and despite my introvertedness, I could go on for hours and hours because I just love everything about what you have to say. I'm fascinated with your interest in music. I'm fascinated with your thoughts and your understanding and your ideas about the mentality of young medical students. What an interesting bit of subject matter that is. But that would take a long, long time, which we don't have a lot of. So what I'm going to do at this point is step out of your way and do what we came here to do, and that is hear from you on your own. So audience, this will be Dr. Matthew Alexander with his personal prescriptions for success.
Thank you so much, Randy. So I spoke about my parents, and what I learned from them was the value of discipline and focus. When my dad was in his early adolescence, he would practice piano 14 hours a day, and he had to be interrupted to have lunch. It's an extreme level of persistence and focus and discipline. And my mother would write, she wrote 4 books of poetry, and she would spend hours just making sure she got the right word. So I think discipline and focus and hard work are certainly essential to success. I think following your dreams and your interests is very important. My dream of music, while I'm not making money from it, provides tremendous pleasure and balance to my life. And my dream of working with people on relationships has really blossomed into a successful private practice. The thing that I learned about career choice is, if you can, the sweet spot is finding something you're passionate about and that you're good at, but also something there's a need for. So with music, there wasn't a tremendous need for another singer-songwriter, but I'm passionate and hopefully I'm good at it. So I keep doing it as an avocation. But I'm very fortunate that in my career, I found something that I'm passionate about, I think I'm good at, and there's a need for. So I think trying to follow those 3 aspects of job choice is very important. I mentioned my colleague, Dale Waxman. One of the things that I have learned in life is that 2 heads are better than 1, and it's very important to collaborate. So as a songwriter, I collaborate with people that are very good at lyric writing. As an educator, I collaborated with Dale Waxman. And as an author, I collaborated with people all over the world who contributed their own film clips in the two books on cinemeducation. I'm a big believer in setting goals and working backwards. So let's say you have a goal that in a year you want to write a book. Then you figure out where you have to be the month before that year is over, 2 months before that year is over, and work backwards. The happiness is not reaching the goal, it's driving toward the goal. I think having a growth mindset is very important, and having a career that you're always learning. So I always feel like whether I was an educator or a therapist, that I'll be a better therapist next month than I am this month because I'm going to learn. So I think learning, there's a word for this in psychology, which is self-efficacy, that has to do with the pleasure in getting better and better at something. And so having a growth mindset and learning from mistakes and setbacks, I think, is very important. It's important to accept feedback from other people in that regard, that they can make you better. I think balance is very important. So most days I take a walk before the sun comes up. I walk for about an hour. I see the sun come up, and that puts me in the right frame of mind for the work that I do. And I think delight comes in small things, the way the sun shines through the leaves, washing your hands. I think there's a lot of delight in very small things, and keeping that in mind when you work with people between sessions to find something delightful so that you can maintain your focus. So I think that's it. Those are my prescriptions for success, and to have fun.
Well, that covers a great deal of wisdom, Matt, and wow is about the only thing that I can say. That really is a very concise and very all-inclusive list, and I appreciate so much you being here to share that with us. I appreciate you being here for a really fascinating conversation that I could continue for a very long, long time. Don't know if I can hold an audience that long. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to tell our audience where they can find you. If you have an email address you want to share, or website,
sure,
or appearances coming up, what have you got for us?
Well, my therapy website is alexandertherapy.com. You can email me at matthew@alexandertherapy.com. I'd be happy to hear from anyone in the audience. And then I do have a website for my music, which is Alexander Tunes, TUNES.com. The email address for that is matthew@alexandertunes.com. And I have a manual that you'll see on my therapy website, which is called 5 Marital Conflicts and How to Solve Them. And then, of course, I have lots of CDs. Interestingly enough, though, of course, we know that CDs are passé, so you can listen to my music on Spotify or Pandora under Matthew Alexander. No appearances for now, but check back in with me. Who knows what's in the future?
Dr. Matthew Alexander, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for being with us today on Prescriptions for Success.
Thank you, Randy. What a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. We hope you will help us reach more listeners by leaving a rating and a review, especially on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can also help by becoming a Patreon member. That link is in the show notes. And we hope you'll also follow our companion podcast, Life-Changing Moments with Dr. Dale Waxman. Special thanks to our producer, Craig Clausen, our promotions manager, Mariana Rodabaugh, and to Ryan Jones, who created and performs our theme music. And remember, be sure to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.